So first, I just wanted to say thanks everyone for joining us tonight and taking time out of your evening to spend it with us and hear from Abe Murray. We're thrilled to have join us for our Health Tech Hunches webinar tonight. And also big thank you to Stephen here, who will be moderating. So before we dive into the session, I just wanted to give some background. I'm Carolyn Nohale, and started Health Tech Hunches a couple of months ago. And what is Health Tech Hunches? It's a website we developed to be the first stop in learning and sharing about careers in digital health. And the goal is really to facilitate connections between students and career professionals who are interested in entering digital health with folks who have experience in the space. And the reason that we did this is to really provide access to folks who can provide advice, their experience, guidance, because everyone on the site has been there, in your shoes where you're looking to either make a pivot, a different type of job, a different type of space. We have all been there and we want to help. So that's where this came from. What we're providing are a few things. The first is videos that we like to call on demand. What you'll see on the site is under each professional's bio page, there are a series of videos where they answer questions they're frequently asked, either about their career or digital health space. So I encourage you all to check those out. You can watch them kind of on your own free time. The second thing we're doing is we're hosting these webinars like we're doing tonight, where you have a chance to ask someone experienced in digital health anything, right? So tonight we'll be featuring Abe, and we have webinars coming up over the coming weeks in the fall. And the third thing that we provide on the site is, bandwidth permitting, some of our speakers have offered to take one-on-ones for folks who have kind of personal questions, second order questions to discuss. So check out our website, you'll see all of that. I think the key thing to note about this program is this is around career advice and experience. If you have questions around specific employers, either in Abe's background or other folks' background, I would put that to the side and ask those at career company presentations and let companies kind of address those. So tonight, as with all of our webinars, are about Abe's experience and kind of advice, given his experience in digital health and, in this case, product management. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce you to Stephen Lung, who's our moderator tonight. He is currently pursuing his master's in quantitative management in health analytics at Fuqua, while he's working as a senior project manager at HTG Molecular Diagnostics, where he develops next generation sequencing-based array assays and manages clinical trials for oncology applications. Prior to HTG, he worked in cancer diagnostics at Ventana Medical Systems, which is part of the larger organization Roche, and also worked at Compass, which helps adults with developmental disabilities live independently in their own homes through supported independent living services. So big thank you to Stephen for moderating tonight. Before I turn it over to him, just want to give everyone a heads up that tonight's recorded. And with that, Stephen, I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, everyone. So first off, I'm actually in Arizona. That's why the background, I'm trying to represent the middle, not just most of the East Coast and West Coast that are people attending these calls. So two things really briefly, the way this call will play out. One, I will go through some pre-submitted questions that I will ask Abe, and throughout that time, I would ask you that you would enter your questions in the Q&A section below. So there's the chat and there's the Q&A. You could please enter in the Q&A, that way I can look at just one place, and then I will go through my questions first, but I'll be checking the Q&A section. If there's anything pertinent, I'll bring those up to Abe, and then I'll go through those questions. So now I would like to introduce Abe to you guys. So Abe Murray has 13 years of product management experience, initially at Google, where he built and led the product team for Google Research. He transitioned to Burley Life Sciences in 2016 to build the Cambridge office and then led the health platforms product team. Most recently, he transitioned back to Google, where he's the product and engineering lead focused on launching digital ink and stylus solutions across Google platforms and products. Prior to Alphabet, Abe co-founded and was the CTO of Doodlebar Inc. He received his MBA from Harvard, his Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and his Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering from the University of Rhode Island. So Abe, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It's great to be here, and hopefully I can be helpful. I hadn't caught the Compass experience in your background, Stephen. I just want to thank you for the work there. My wife and I both have siblings who need such services, and it's really great when people work on making their lives better. And that's something that I think just applies to everything we're talking about here in healthcare, where the missions that we work on matter so much. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. So Abe, would you like to start us off just with the basics? How did you ended up in product management?
Sure. So thank you for the bio. That's, you know, the very short view of how it happened. I did not know product management existed before Google asked me to come interview for the job. So I will say I stumbled into product management. But I got there by, you know, just going way back. I grew up in a family business and kind of was taught that ownership mentality of anything you do, you know, own it completely and it's yours to make successful and so on. And I took that with me to engineering and to my work as an engineer, which kind of led me to become a TL, a tech lead type that we say at a Google, and start caring about not just what I'm building, but why I'm building it. And I always thought a lot about those kinds of questions and problems. And that brought me to business school, where I was lucky enough to get into Harvard and build my own startup, because all I wanted to do was build companies and cool technology products. And so I called myself the CTO, but really what that meant is kind of did it all, figure out the product, write some of the code, then manage the engineers. And when I realized that I needed a job that could actually pay for my baby, which my startup was not doing, I got invited to interview at Google for this thing called product management. And before I went and did the interviews, I went and read up on what it was and how I might want to interview for the jobs and so on. And I really liked what I learned about the role. I think it overlaps very much with that built idea of, you know, an ownership mentality, somebody who wants to build things and care about the products, the users, the businesses that support these things. So that's what brought me into product management. And once at Google, that wound up being a great training ground and an opportunity to get even better at it.
So jumping off of that, actually, like you talk about, you had to learn what product management was back then. Obviously, now you have so much experience. One of the questions that I have here is if you could talk about the similarities and differences among product management, project management, and even thrown in their strategy, and what type of candidates should be looking at each of these positions in terms of fit.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I work with all of those roles and have at both Google and at Verily in my time there. I think all of these roles at Google and Verily, we tend to call what I think many people think of as project management. We'll say program managers. I think program management, product management, technical product management, strategy, these attract very similar folks, right? They're scrappy folks. They have that ownership mentality that I've talked about. And most of you're all here you want the company to succeed. You might bring slightly different backgrounds to the role, but I think you bring the same attitude. So they're similar roles. I think product management is often responsible for the priorities of what we build and really deeply understanding the users and the business. And project management and program management can often be more responsible for coordinating, organizing, creating the processes, setting up the operations to be effective. So that can be a common divide, though because they're similar people and with similar perspectives, the roles can bleed. And if somebody's strong in one area, they can pick up more responsibilities and vice versa. The technical project management role is often somebody who has that deeper technical background and can really spend the time to roll up their sleeves, sit down with an engineering team or a science team and come up with what are the bug lists, right? Really getting into the nitty-gritty of execution. But again, people with that skill set often can also do other things up in the product management area. So I'd say they're similar but different, and they're distinct in that often companies hire people for these roles, because, you know, I need a product manager to own this business for me and figure out what to do. I need a project manager because this is a complex business with a number of partners, and I need to make sure that all of the things happen at the right time. So often you're somebody in that role who can do other roles as well. And it's good to remember, like, I'm here to do this job for the company. I might want to shift jobs over time, and there's room for that. But it's also important to just, you know, understand the role you're playing at any time. I'll say on the strategy side, at Google, in my experience as a product manager, we had relatively less involvement with strategy. Product management did more of that work. And we might reach out to a central strategy team on occasion when we needed help with something specific, say, figure out how to price a product or something more like that. In my experience in healthcare, strategy became ever more important because there's so much going on. As you know, this is a very complex industry. You know, what's going on with reimbursement? How is the ecosystem changing? Who are the players? And that's an area where it's a full-time job just to understand that and digest it and guide teams. And so I wound up having much stronger interactions with our strategy team from the product management side in my healthcare experience. So that's something I'll say about strategy. The other thing that I will say is I often run into people who have held multiple of these roles over time. Again, because they attract similar people with similar mindsets. You might be a product manager at one company and a program manager at another, and then a strategy person at another. And you're capable of all of those roles, and it might be that you're more inclined towards one of them, or that the project you were interested in had an opening in this area. So again, I see some flexibility here, and I can speak more about this later.
So real quick, having said that, I mean, you mentioned going back to the strategy team for feedback. So then, even though the product manager owns the product, in a way that product idea still comes from strategy?
I think I would describe strategy as more of a support role in my experience, or it's not a phrasing I like, but a throat to choke, right? Who's responsible? Where does the buck stop with what you do and how you advocate for, here's what we should build, synthesizing all of the input? That's usually on the product management team's plate. That said, as you know, for any big decisions, you'll do this with the, you know, decisions are made by leadership. You have multiple stakeholders at the table, and strategy is a stakeholder. You know, operational leaders are stakeholders. So product management might be responsible for synthesizing and presenting the path that you think you should go down based upon the inputs from these other team members. You know, but it becomes a discussion, as these things often are. The other thing that I'll say about program management, or project management, I think I spoke to this earlier. In my time at Google, and from my experience talking to other technology industry PMs, whether it's startups or Amazon or Facebook, I think that it's more common that there is not a project manager or program manager on a team. Usually the product manager and the tech lead, right, the lead engineer, they share that responsibility. And depending on their natural inclinations and how the team runs, it might lend one way or the other. I have been on larger teams where we have project management, and usually it's teams where the complexity is building up. So if you think about what does it take to ship a new release of an Android software platform, right? There are program managers who make that ship run, and in the absence of them, there would be chaos. So I think that really is how the role that they serve and how do they function. That we bring this, you know, massive team together on a, you know, probably if you add up the number of human hours that go into it, like moon landing size projects, maybe not quite that large, but, you know, up at the larger end of complexity. In my experience, more teams in healthcare need this, because even a smaller idea in healthcare is a complex idea. There's nothing easy about what we do here. And so program management becomes a critical and important part of the team.
Awesome. Yeah, and that actually answers one of the other questions I had. So jumping up to another one, it's in regards to actually getting a PM job. Without formal PM experience, how do people overcome the standard job descriptions that say, hey, I want 3, 5, 10 plus years of PM experience? What skills or abilities are really behind that that kind of stated requirement?
Yeah, so this is always the most important question, and it breaks my heart when I speak with amazing candidates who I believe personally can be an amazing PM, but they don't have that experience, and on the team I'm looking at, I see that I won't be able to bring them in. So the career advice I give, and well, stepping way back, the career advice I give to everybody is be lucky, right? Just before you do anything, be lucky. And you're all very lucky already to have gotten into your graduate programs and so on. You're making luck for yourself. But when you think about saying, I want to move from place I am to product management, being lucky is really important. And the way that you become lucky is that you persevere in the face of unluckiness, right? So I will say to somebody, it's been my experience on many of the projects that I've been on in my career that I could not hire somebody who did not have that experience. And I'm always upfront with people. I'll say, I think you're great, but I don't think that I can hire you without that experience. Go find somebody else who will hire you. So I've been in the lucky position at a big name brand tech company that we can have a very high filter and find people who have that experience. If you go to a startup or a not top tech company, you can often get the product management role, especially on the back of a career program like a graduate program or something. But even in the absence of that, just by saying, I want to do this thing. So either pursue a role transfer inside of your current organization or go find another job. And through the years, I give this advice and people take it. They'll often, they'll be in a business school program and they'll be going through the recruiting funnel and they'll say, I really want to be a product manager. All of my friends are becoming consultants, so I'll do some of those interviews. And I really like Amazon, and so I'll interview at Amazon. But I really want to be a product manager, and then they'll find a couple, like 1 or 2 places that will give them a product management role, but it'll be a smaller company I haven't heard of. And then they'll come to me and say, what do I do? And I always start by saying, well, what do you really want, right? Do you care more about the name brand of having Amazon on your resume right now? Do you want to chase the consulting route because that's what the herd is, stampeding off to do? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? My brother's a consultant. It's a fantastic industry. You'll have fun. Or do you really want to be a product manager? And if you want to be a product manager, take the product management job. Because if you can do that, you will actually do it. You'll build up that experience. Everything you do is hard, any company you go to. So obviously there's a quality bar, right? Don't take a terrible job, but if you can get a product management job, take it. And then you'll be able to come back and talk to some equivalent version of me at your shiny company down the road and get that job, or you'll find out that you're having a great time anyway. So I've had that happen multiple times with people who come to me for advice and they take the product management job and they're off to a product management career.
Awesome. So obviously here we're at Health Tech Hunches. So there's a lot of people actually looking for the health tech side of PM. And one of the questions I had in relation to that is, I think you also mentioned these on one of your pre-recorded health tech videos, that you built teams with both PMs that came from a purely tech background and some that had a more clinical background. But when you onboarded PMs with no clinical background, what did you recommend them do to bolster those skills and knowledge on the clinical side?
Really good question. And I realized I didn't answer part of your last question, which I'll go back to and answer as part of this. You asked kind of what skills or abilities are behind me asking for you to have PM experience on your resume, right? So as somebody hiring product managers, I'll say this role, because product management owns the priorities, right? They say, here's what we will do. Here's what our team will work on. They wind up directing the work of the engineering team. And if they direct it incorrectly, you will send your engineers in the wrong direction. And at many tech companies, including health tech companies, your engineers are one of your largest expenses. So if you make a mistake in hiring product management, you're making a very expensive mistake. So I'd say there's a fearful hiring mentality to say, I want to hire people where I know that they will be successful. And so that's why we're asking for that experience is I want to see that you've done it before. And what do I want to see that you've done? I want to see that you have shipped something, right? Really, at the end of the day, have you shipped something that mattered? Have you shepherded an idea to becoming the right idea, corral the team behind making that idea real, pushed it out into the world, and seen it be successful, or learned from a limited success, et cetera? Like, have you lived that? And do I trust that if I bring you onto my team and hand you a portion of our engineering, talent to direct, that you'll do that appropriately? So that's really what we're looking for. And that's why I say, go get that job, right? The way that you get that job is you become a junior PM somewhere, somebody gives you a small team, and you build up that credibility, and then you can come to a larger company and say, look, I did it, right? When I look at, so going to your clinical question, when I'm looking for people like that, product managers who have shipped and created great products, health tech is a new enough industry that there aren't that many PMs who have both shipped products in the way that an Amazon or Google or Facebook or tech startup thinks about a product management role doing, and have also built up a deep clinical font of knowledge, right? Those people exist, they're fantastic. They're, if not unicorns, fairly rare. Call up your favorite company, they want to hire you. So we wound up hiring people who have no clinical background, but are great technology PMs. And then we say, now I need you to become a healthcare PM as well. So the advice that I gave people in this situation is, one, always talk to users, talk to stakeholders, talk to clinicians, get out there and do the thing. Often a PM at a Google will show up to Google and be told, welcome to Google, you're now product manager for Google Analytics. And they may not know anything about the analytics industry. So we say, go learn, right? Learn about the other competitors, learn about your users, learn about the usage, the metrics, et cetera. So this is similar to a new PM role. If you switched companies in the tech industry, now your job is to learn about healthcare. So go read the basics. What's making this country tick from a healthcare perspective? Drink from the fire hose. But often you're then working on a specific project, right? You are a PM now, and you're responsible for a specific health condition. I want to do a disease management program for health condition X, or I am a PM for a, analytics product in this area supporting, Medicare Advantage programs. Whatever the thing is, you say, go learn about that. And if you're working on a specific disease, some of the best advice we've received from our clinical colleagues is read the textbook, right? And this is actually great advice anywhere you go. I've heard it not in the context of healthcare, though it applies in healthcare, is go read a textbook. Because often a textbook compresses knowledge of an entire sphere into pretty readable chunks, and you can get through it fairly quickly. So that's a really great shortcut to learning fast. And one of my great examples of a product manager that I had on my team who I pulled in from Google because I knew they were great, but they didn't know healthcare at all. And they read the textbook, they read the literature, they spent as much time as they could with our clinicians, they read about users. And kind of 6 months in, our head clinician said, I believe that this person had been doing it for an entire career. Now, so just go learn, right? It's hard, it's extra work on top of the day job, but that's the way to do it. The other thing that I would say is be humble, right? So I've seen it go wrong. So like the way to make this go wrong is to do that and then assume that you know it all, and show up and start trotting out the words that you read and acting like you've known them for 10 years. And that can really rub people in healthcare wrong, particularly clinicians who are, used to, maybe thinking if you're saying the medical terms incorrectly, you might not care about patient safety. You might not care about accuracy of the information you're working on. So I'd say learn as much as you can and be humble as you trot out your newfound knowledge. And let people know that you're still learning.
Thank you so much. That was great insight. So moving on to a different question. Obviously here, everybody came to hear about how great a PM role is. This question kind of seeks to show the other side, if there's another side. So what is not so great about the product manager role, in your opinion?
I'll be clear, I'm very biased. Even though I didn't know the job existed, I've loved it. It's been, you know, it was the thing I was doing before I knew it was a job. I've now been able to do it for a while and call it my job. And if I was sitting at home doing nothing, it would still be my job because I'd invent the next thing and product manage it. I think it's a bunch of fun. And I think we can talk a bit and like what, and I see some of the questions here from our, you know, participants, which we can get to, like how are product managers evaluated? What is success? Be happy to talk to that in a moment. I think one of the cliches you'll hear people say is product management is like the CEO of the product. And I think that's a nice analogy, though not perfect, because it says you're the owner, you're responsible for the business, you're responsible for the thing working well. And so I'll speak to that in a moment. But in terms of what isn't great about the role, while the CEO analogy is not perfect, it's not perfect because you're not actually the CEO, right? You're somebody who the CEO hired to build a piece of their business. And if you were the CEO and you felt strongly about something, you could just do it. And if you had a disagreement with, say, the engineering team or the clinical team, you'd ideally convince them to see it your way. But if you couldn't, you'd tell them that this is where we're going. You are not that as a product manager. Your job is to, you know, the classic, you know, in authority via influence. You have to convince people, bring them along. You have to convince your leadership. You can't always convince your leadership. And so you can sometimes feel like the beautiful vision for this product that you want to build can't be the thing that you can actually get out the door. So that's one thing that's not so great. The other thing is that leadership can be lonely sometimes, right? And I think all of these roles, anytime that you're doing something hard, you don't know if you're right, you don't know if you're wrong, you have to make that decision without enough time. It's kind of this classic problem. And as the product manager, you know, you're one of the leaders of the team and people are looking to you to know that you're pointing them in the right direction. So I'd say that's also hard, is making those hard calls, figuring out what to do, and then moving down the path that you believe to be right, but also know might be wrong. So that can be scary. And then there's too much to be done. Your job is prioritization. Sometimes everything can seem like a priority, and like that's what makes these decisions hard. And you can't make everybody happy. You can't make all of your users happy. You can't make all of your stakeholders happy. So it's like you're holding the bag for many of these decisions. As you make them, you're going to make people unhappy, and that's going to be hard. Like most of us like to make people happy, and it's hard to be the person who's making the decisions that make people unhappy. And finally, you know, as product manager, you're responsible for a successful product, for winning in the market. There is an element of competition there. I think many of us are competitive people. But in competition, you can lose sometimes, and losing's not fun. So I'd say my biggest highs have been like when we've successfully built a business and scaled it and made it work well. And my biggest frustrations have been when we've put all of that same amount of effort in and not had the outcome that we hoped for. And you just felt like, you know, is that what we got for all of that work? So there you go.
Yes, I mean, let's actually go to that question that you mentioned, because it's about your performance, right, and how that product came out. So going to Yi's question, and then we'll jump to that one, the question that's upvoted twice. But to Yi's question, how is a product manager evaluated? What's success metrics put out by supervisors as opposed to senior PM? Is the role, running a startup as a CTO, COO, meaning kind of your CEO analogy?
Yeah. So here's where I would say, I'll speak to the ideal case, and then I'll say a little bit about when the ideal case is not ideal. In my experience, the ideal case is product management is evaluated solely on impact, right? To the organization, to the world. You're here leading a team, building a business, you know, responsible for a product or a portion of a product, and really what matters is, do you make the right decisions, make the right calls, keep the team moving, and ship a successful product that helps build the business. And if you do that, then you are rewarded with career growth and compensation. And if you can't do that, then this isn't the job for you. And I've had some product managers who, great people, maybe had some of the skills, but for whatever reason couldn't bring the teams along and couldn't ship product. And then that's not going to be a role where you can stay around. But it's really important. So I would say impact, launches. Back when I started at Google many years ago, launches was almost the only metric. It was launch, launch, launch. And I think you can see some kind of like external criticism of, if you're always launching but not sticking around to build a great product, how does that work out? I think the tech industry in general was like that and has shifted to this idea of landings, right? You have to launch a product, but you also have to land it. It has to launch and succeed and grow. So when I was building our ebook business, we had to launch an ebook business, a set of apps, a store, and then it was successful on day one, but it had to get much bigger. And so we scaled it and grew it for, a year and more after. And that was all part of my career growth and how I was assessed and evaluated. I would say what's hard about this, and as a product manager, you have to think about this, is because that really should be the key thing that you're measured for. If you wind up working on something that isn't important or doesn't move the needle for the company, you may not have the career growth that you hope for. It's like part of your job as a product manager is to be that entrepreneur thinking, how do I make sure I'm working on the things that matter the most to the company, to the world? How do I find the best way to use the resources under my control? And so in that way, I think it can be a very entrepreneurial role. If you just show up and do what you're told on the tin, your job is to be an X, Y, and a Z, and then here's your team, and you get that team to do an X, Y, and a Z. That can be okay, but if you can get the team to do X, Y, and Q, and Z didn't matter, but Q was materially impactful to the company, then you've done a much better job. So it's your job to think about that and find that.
Awesome. So, just to clarify on that, so then you're saying that as a PM, at least in the companies that you've been at, you actually have the creative openness to bring your own ideas and try to pitch it to the team, pitch it to the company. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is where I'll move from ideal to non-ideal. So in the ideal world, yes, like that should be your job. And that kind of a person should be the person who's a great PM. Different teams have different experiences. Some teams have, they just need PMs to build features or maybe own a piece of it and really build this roadmap out quickly, focus more on the execution side. There have been times when I've been on projects where I knew what the innovative thing was that I wanted to build, and I knew that the amount that the company was willing to invest in the product was different from what I would need to go after the bigger win, and that we were okay with the smaller win. And then you're just in an execution game, right? I'm going to do these things that are pretty clear. And that can be when it's frustrating. You're thinking, I'm not actually the CEO. And you can still you of course should do the best that you can inside of that, but you'll live inside of some resource constraints. At the same time, I think in my experience, it's never been frowned upon for somebody doing that to put their head up and look around and say, how can I help put my energy into something that does matter, where it will be valued by the company?
Awesome, thanks. All right, let's jump back to the questions from the attendees. These ones got to both. What's the product manager's career path? What's a natural next role after PM transition into other non-PM roles?
Yeah, great question. And I think the earlier question also asked, who is a product manager's manager? And I've seen a number of different answers to that. So I'd say in most of the places I see it, product management reports into product management, and there is a product management function with, say, a director or a vice president, or sometimes the CTO or CEO. In a startup or smaller company, often the CEO is the first product manager, and they had the idea, the founder, and they owned that and they did it for as long as they could, and then they hire product management to help them. So PM usually reports up into somebody like that, who thinks about the role and the function and understands what they do and helps guide them and grow them in their career, and explains to them that you have to figure out what to do, build, ship, and launch. I've also seen situations where product management reports into engineering, and where engineering reports into product, so they wind up moving around a little bit, and it can all work fine. I've managed engineers in the past. I'm managing them currently. I've managed user experience people in the past, and at other times I haven't. So it's somewhat flexible. This goes into the kind of, what does the career path look like? So many product managers look like me, where they are engineers who were inclined towards what does the user want and so on. And then they became product managers. I have known some of them who said, I've done product management for a while. Now I want to be an engineer again, and actually started writing code. I've known others who have said, I want to be an engineering manager, which is really more of an execution focus. I want to care more about how well we're building and shipping code, and let somebody else worry about whether we're building the right thing. So like lateral moves like that are reasonable and happen. I've also seen product managers go into venture capital, private equity, right? Some of these investing roles, and also over into program management or technical program management. So I think these roles, as I said earlier, they're fairly similar. People can move between them, and sometimes do, usually because they realize, I think there can be a bias to say that product management is the coolest job, and if you're not that, you want to be that. And I don't agree with that. I like it personally because it's the job I love, and I think there's benefits to it. But I think sometimes people go after this job because they think that it's the shiny job, and then at some point they realize, you know what, the things I love doing are not 90% of this job. They're one of these related jobs, and so they can shift roles. There's the classic kind of just career progression, which is I think where I've bumped into, which is be a junior PM, prove yourself, expand the scope of the number of engineers the company trusts to you, keep doing more of that, get promotions, at some point manage product managers and build teams. And so I've built up teams of 20 plus product managers a couple times in my career, managed engineers and others along the way, and you become director and so on. And so that's a fine path as well. I'd say many product managers go to create startups, right? So often you are thinking like a CEO and owning things, and then at some point you get frustrated with having to ask, for permission all the time. So that's also a reasonable career path.
Awesome. So actually, I know there's one question that's upvoted, but before we get to that, and I think we'll have time, I want to jump to Claire's question because I think it relates a little bit in terms of us defining roles. Could you please explain what a product marketing manager's role is in the team?
Really good question. So I can explain what it means for tech companies in my experience, and I can try to explain what I think it means in some of the healthcare companies that I've seen. So, but I might be wrong. So with full humility, I'll try and we'll see where we get. At a Google or an Amazon or an Apple, product marketing manager is usually somebody who, call it, owns all of the creative content around a product. So when I built our ebook business and our Play Store and was part of that launch, we had product marketing managers who were responsible for, first of all, what is the brand? We didn't have Play as a brand, the App Store on Android. So they thought about, worked with graphic designers and others to think through what should we call this thing and why, what emotions will it evoke? And then as they came together with a branding story, they also said, how do we launch this into the market? How do we bring along our ecosystem partners? So did some of that work to say, what's the messaging? What's the go-to-market strategy for this logo brand message? They worked with the product management teams because we were building the things that would launch, to make sure that we had all of the right content and collateral that we needed to put into the product, and that it was cohesive across these multiple complex teams. And then once you're launched, product marketing management, does everything from, running ad campaigns to, tracking metrics, classic marketing function, if you will. And when I was running a retail store, less health tech, but we also had them doing things like curation and merchandising, and we had specialist functions there. In my experience in health tech, similar answer, right? Branding, logo, marketing, that kind of thing. That's what the product marketing management function is. I'm ensuring you're getting good press coverage, thinking about what is our strategy to get the market out there, to get the message to the market. I would say marketing's even more important in healthcare, right? I was maybe not surprised to see that, but they're huge pieces of our teams in healthcare, because at the end of the day, everything we're doing is behavior change, right? I'm either trying to convince an individual to engage in a disease management program so that they can become healthier, or I'm trying to change the behavior of a purchaser in the healthcare ecosystem to do something different and purchase from my company, my product, right? It's all marketing, and it's hard, and they're very long, complex enterprise sales cycles. So again, in health tech, product marketing managers help us think about who should we be targeting, what conferences should we go to, what journals should we be publishing in, what evidence should we be building, like some of those questions into how do we successfully go to market. I'll go back to something I said much earlier, saying it was relatively harder for me to find product managers who had a decade of experience as healthcare product managers in the tech industry. In part because as I interacted with some of our healthcare partner companies, they seem to, in my observation, and this is where I'm going out on a branch, so with some humility, they seem to break the product management role up into a couple different related roles, kind of an upstream, downstream product management. They might split out, they might call a product manager something that we would say more as a product marketing manager. And so you have people who have great deep experience, but only with a piece of what an Amazon or a Facebook would expect a product manager to do. And so we did hire some of those folks. They're fantastic, and basically, they then have to pick up more responsibilities and grow in ways that they didn't there. But I think that's where some of the product marketing managers versus product managers, or even Microsoft classically, their product managers were all called program managers, and their product managers were something else. So they've now changed their titles so that they map the rest of the tech industry, but sometimes you'll just see that the titles don't quite mean the same thing between different corporations. For those who don't know, the product management role goes way back to Procter & Gamble, consumer packaged goods. And they really did describe it as the CEO of a business, right? I am the product manager for, paper towels, and I have to think about how to go for it.
Yeah, thanks for that details on that upstream, downstream marketing, because I was just actually having that conversation today with one of the marketing folks at my company, and it's exactly that. He's mainly upstream and was trying to contrast it with product management, and he's like, yeah, I'm just learning that side now, but before that.
Yeah, and to jump in on that, that's extremely common at pharma. Like I've seen that at all the pharma companies I've talked to. And I think upstream winds up being more like what we'd call product marketing. At the same time, in most of my experience, I haven't had the benefit of a product marketing manager. And so again, this is where product management has to fill the gaps and do their best to do that well. I will guarantee that I can't do that as well as someone who is their real job. But in the absence of anybody to do it, I'll do it better than nobody, right? So.
All right, so shifting a little bit more at an industry, bigger picture question here. What's the one area that we think is unexplored and will receive the largest attention from future marketplace? Sometimes something that lies at the intersection of healthcare and tech.
Well, if I could answer this well, then I'd be raising money from you all to build the business. So I think, in all seriousness, I always take humility with me to everything I've done as a product manager, a combination of humility and paranoia. Humility that I don't know enough, and paranoia that you know, my project won't ship or it will fail, and I've got to make sure that I've answered all the questions that I don't yet know, run the experiments to find out if we'll succeed. So often I take that combination of things to go ask all the smart people around me what they think. Questions very much like this. So I will just say, my brother-in-law was at Amwell. They've done very well through this COVID crisis, right? We've seen what's happened with Teladoc and Livongo. I've spent a lot of time in the middle of disease management in my health tech experience, seeing how that's playing out. I continue to think that there are huge opportunities there, and as much press as we've seen around it, like the reality is that most people are not engaging in these kinds of things, and we still see just the you know, chronic disease problems driving costs. So looking at that would be, you know, the place that I think there's stuff to be done. And at the same time, I see that it's very hard sales cycles, right? So it's the kind of thing where it's hard to break in as a startup. The really cool thing is what happened out of COVID with some of the changes to the regulatory environment, spurring some innovation there. And I have, you know, people I know who were doing kind of pre-A round startups in the Boston area in this space where before COVID happened, my questions were, how on earth are they going to take that great idea and get it out into the world? And now they, you know, that question is just gone. Like, it wasn't a real thing, it was a regulatory thing, and the regulations changed, and now they can move much faster. So I would imagine that more people will innovate around the edges there, and that maybe will give you know, some opportunities for interesting companies to come together. I talked myself in a circle, so lost my train of thought. We'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll do the next question until then. So I know there's at least now 3 medical device people, me, Yi, and the person that upvoted the question. So is medical device knowledge and work experience is going to help you to get a PM role? In what way, if yes? What about not?
Yeah, so here's, I'd say it depends. Yes. So I was at Verily before. I think you can know from public experience that Verily's been involved in some hardware plays and some software plays. And so we had product managers with backgrounds in both. And I would say, I would never hire me to run a medical device program because that's not what I do, right? I'm pretty darn good at shipping software, at shipping complex software operational things, but I would not be a person who could, you know, most efficiently run a medical device project. So we staffed our product management teams based on people with those backgrounds, and they were good at it. And there's a huge skill set there when it comes down to thinking about how do we not just design something that's safe and effective and novel and all of that interesting stuff, but then how do we think about how do we build it? How do we make it, you know, work at a factory? How do we ship this thing and so on? So there's a deep skill set there. But I'd say if that's what you're really good at, you'll probably want to look at med tech startup type companies or companies that have that need. And it's not to say that you can't take that background and move into software product management. You certainly can, especially if you've you know, got a deep enough engineering background. I'd say as a product manager, I should have said this way back. I've been involved in recruiting for you know, Google for a long while, from MBA programs and from elsewhere. I interviewed a number of people, and I've hired a number of product managers who did not have computer science backgrounds, did not have engineering backgrounds. Now it's the exception, you know, the exception, but it happens. And so we're looking for the skill set, not, you know, a list of things that if you don't have them, you're out. And the thing that we're looking for is really, you know, that combination of you've shipped, you know how to make the right decisions, and you're credible with the engineering teams. And you don't have to have that, you know, computer science background to be credible with the software engineering team. So medical tech background folks are often, in my experience, extremely credible with engineering teams, know how to speak their language, think in, you know, the ways that they need to think to make that transition. So that's certainly possible. I'd say the downside is, in my experience, med tech companies also do some of this upstream, downstream split thing. So part of it is if you're going to move into a, more tech startup kind of product management role, just think about what the expectations of that role are versus what you're taking with you or have experienced in med tech companies.
Cool. So we have 4 more minutes left, and I think we can answer the last question before we shift it back to Caroline. What would make an ex-consultant successful as a PM based on your experience working with PMs that came from consulting?
Yeah. So I think the answer is I've worked with a number of PMs who came from consulting, right? So I can think of at least 4 that I have worked with in the last year. And I think everything I've said about what makes product management, what makes a good product manager applies to the consulting PM. The nice thing about people with consulting backgrounds is they've usually got more of that business perspective, right? They've seen a bunch of different businesses. They're used to thinking about, how do I structure thought logically? How do I persuade and convince people? How do I put a story together? Very good at all of those things. How do I analyze a market? Think about how to go to a market, that kind of stuff. Where they may not have had the same experiences, how do I see it all the way through? How do I, coordinate with my engineers, my, folks? Anybody who's operated a business knows that no matter how great your ideas are, and even if you're correct, right, you've had all the right ideas, you made the right decisions, like amazing. You didn't make any glaring mistakes. You've got the teams excited to do it, and you start writing code and going. There will be a trough of despair in the middle, right? There's always that terrible time when everything's breaking and the customers are unhappy. And it's like, you aren't sure if you're right anymore. And you have to keep going while trying to find out if you made mistakes. And then you dig your way out of the trough of despair and ship something. And consultants, in my experience, don't always have that experience. Like, they might have told people what to do and then they, move on. And I love my brother, and, for a while that was his consulting reality. And now they ship things and operationalize things. And so he's lived this and knows it quite well. So I think it might be a new experience for a consultant or something where they just, as they go through it, say, I'm learning how to do this and I've got to do it. But that's true of anybody who goes through it the first time, right? No matter what your background. Computer science grad out of undergrad, you haven't done that until you've done it, right?
Well, thank you so much. Actually, that's the last question, and we've run out of time. Thanks, everyone. Actually, I'll turn it over to Caroline to close us.
I'll just say thank you to everybody for being here. It was a pleasure, hopefully helpful, and thank you, Carolyn and Stephen. So, Carolyn.
Thanks, Abe. And yeah, again, big thank you to Abe for being here tonight. I realize I didn't mention this up front, but I had the privilege of working with Abe for 4.5 years, saw him in action. He was, obviously a product management leader within the organization. Learned from him then, and super excited to hear your thoughts today, Abe. I'm still learning from you now, so definitely appreciate you being here. Stephen, thank you for moderating, and again, thank you everyone for joining. Just want to give you guys a heads up on what's coming next. Abe kind of kicked off a series of product management discussions. So after Abe next week, we're actually having Richa Gujarati. She's from Apple, where she's a product manager. You know how Abe was talking about folks with med tech background? She can speak to that. She comes from medical device, similar background actually that I do. So Rich is coming next week. After that's Pav Jakowski. So different flavor of product management. He came out of Illumina and kind of on the genomic side, precision medicine. Now he's working in mixed reality, cognition, and AI. He's worked at little startups, and then now at Microsoft, did a stint at Amazon. So across all of these, product sessions, you'll kind of get a feel for all the different kind of opportunities and the differences across these kind of domains. So I encourage you to show up to those. Second thing is, please do sign up for our email list, because that's how you hear about the folks that we're adding to the site every week and the webinars that are coming up through the fall. One request, this is all driven by volunteers. Please fill out a survey. I'm going to send it to you. Takes 60 seconds tops, so it's super easy. Spend 1 minute, because we really appreciate the feedback, and the whole point is so we can bring the best content to you. And with that, I just want to say thanks again for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you on upcoming webinars. Have a good night, everybody.